If you'd like, you can open your Bibles to Hosea 12. I'm going to read from verse 3. This particular passage, the Genesis 32 passage, is kind of like an old friend to me. I've seen a pattern in Genesis 32 that is to me a pattern of our spiritual life. And I find a lot of encouragement in it because it really, there's a thread that starts, early in the scriptures, and it picks up in Genesis 32, and it picks up in different places, and really it ends in Revelation in chapter 2 and chapter 3. This idea of overcoming. So I just kind of want to share this idea with you because I think it's, what is in your mind when you hear the word to overcome? Right? What is in your mind? Because the scriptural concept might be a little different. And hearing, when you read the passages and you have kind of the filter of what your expectation and your definitions are, sometimes we can read things and we can build expectations of what's expected of us in this case and have the wrong idea. And I think Genesis 32 does a really phenomenal job of expanding on the concept and laying it before our feet so that we can understand what God is looking for in his people. Now I'm going to begin the overcoming discussion actually in Hosea 12 because it tells us something about Genesis 32 and the struggle that happens here between Jacob and the angel. So we'll start with just verse 2. And the Lord has a charge to bring against Judah. He will punish Jacob according to his ways and repay him according to his deeds. Interesting, it's talking about God's going to punish Jacob according to his ways, according to his deeds, which sounds like a judgment conversation. In the womb he grasped his brother's heel, and as a man he struggled with God. Right, and right there, that doesn't sound like God is making a positive declaration of Jacob's character, does it? In the wound, he grasped his brother's heel, hence the name Jacob, right? Is he not rightly named? For he has deceived me these 2 times, hence the name deceiver or supplanter, someone who inappropriately takes the place of another person. And so the initial comment on this judgment is that this demonstrated a negative aspect of his character. But in verse 4, it says, he struggled with the angel and overcame him. He wept and begged for his favor. I think I repeat myself. This verse is interesting because it says he overcame the angel. We're going to look at this passage in a second. And then it repeats by saying he wept and begged for his favor. So I want you to think about that because it's funny that we have to go forward to create a foundation for part of the conversation we have to go back for. Normally it's the other way around, right? But this is something we have that's being revealed by the prophet Hosea so that when we then go back and look at the event in Genesis 32, we can have a context because it isn't revealed this way in Genesis 32. So as we turn to Genesis 32, I want you to pay attention. So there's 2 things going on. There's an event that's being described, and then there's something under the event. The event is expressing more than just what's happening. So it's got symbology, right? It's got timing. It's got names. It's got activity. And each of these things is revealing a part of a message. And it's revealing a part of a message in a metaphorical way, which means what you hear and what it's communicating are 2 different things, but they're connected. They're 2 different things, but they're connected. So that's what we're looking for. So when you look at the verse and it starts really in 21, 22, and the first part I want to draw your attention to is that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, his 11 children. 1 child isn't born yet, Benjamin, right, son of his right hand, is not born yet. And he crossed the ford of the Jabbok, and he sent them across the stream. He sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone And I'm going to put a period right there for a second. I want you to visualize Jacob's got all this stuff. He's sending it all. It's all going to be in front of Esau in the next chapter, right? In the next day. He's going to spend the night. And what he decides to do, as we talked about in the previous class, he's having this kind of his coming of spiritual age. He's beginning to realize his place in the eyes of God. He's beginning to shift where his mind is. Right before this, he was trying to solve the problem and how to figure it out and how to make things happen. And now he's realizing God has done this, to him, right? And he's having these realizations. Imagine the insights. I mean, I know that, most of us in some way or fashion or form, at some point we have this glowing insight and we're like, well, I'm going to have to reassess everything I thought I knew because now my life has changed. I've discovered something I did not expect, right? And that is where Jacob is right now. And so one of the things he does is he crosses a river, and then he takes everything he has and he casts it to the other side. I don't know where your mind is right now when you're thinking about symbols, but this ought to be a pretty interesting symbol where he takes everything that defines his identity and he puts it across the river. They have to cross the river, and he ends up alone. And it's interesting because what it actually says, and there he was alone. We're going to come back because I'm going to expound on that. But he's alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Okay, if that's all I've got, if I tell you that I went across the river and I was all by myself and then I wrestled with a man till daybreak. Interesting question. Who's the man? Don't answer that out loud. If I'm alone and I'm wrestling with a man, who's the man? When the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him here. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So we've already talked about the name of Jacob and what it means. What does the name of Jacob mean? Anyone? Deceiver, right? So the name of Jacob is deceiver. That's one thing I want to pull out. Something really peculiar happens here, something that doesn't make sense at face value if we're thinking about it. There's two or three. What is one thing that doesn't make sense at face value in this story? I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying if you think about it, it's like, how does that work? What's one thing? Anyone? Yes?
Jacob doesn't, or he stands a chance.
Right? If this is an angel, if this is a malach, right? A powerful angel of God, and the angel of God, of course, is powered by the Spirit of God, how do you wrestle that? How do you grab it? How do you throw it down to the floor, right? Do you understand the question? How is Jacob wrestling with an angel? Right? And that's a great question. That doesn't, at face value, make sense with what we know about the power of the angels of God. It's the armies outside of Jerusalem, and, God's going to deliver them. And the next morning, a couple of guys go out, they're like, we're going to give up to the armies. It's better than starving to death in Jerusalem. And this is what, the angel at night, 89,000 of them woke up dead. I love that. They woke up dead. I don't know how you wake up dead, but they woke up dead. And you're thinking, and that's an angel. That's an angel, right? These are powerful beings because they have the power of God imbued in them to do God's work. And I think that's part of the storyline that's here. So you start off with crossing the river and having everything sent across the river. So there's a conversation on crossing over and the river. There's a conversation on being alone, right? Everything that is part of your identity is separated from you. There's an identity of then being alone and then wrestling. What else? So when are they wrestling? Because this is another piece of the pie. When are they wrestling? When do they start? In the dark. And when do they end? That's right. In the morning, at daybreak. Okay, so where in the Bible might we find a symbol that begins in the dark and ends in daybreak? A creation, right? How many people remember that happening in Genesis 1? Right? The very first creation is the creation of light. Everything starts in darkness and ends in light. And that happens 6 times. We talked about that last night. And so you get this pattern of God's plan for mankind is that he developed man. But when do you start? Does God create us in light to live in light? Or does God create us in the dark and then bring us through a journey through the darkness? Right? It's no wonder that the Bible repeats the pattern, because in the Bible, God's Word, he's expressed the pattern for us to see it, so that when we see that something starts at dark and it ends at light, that we immediately cast our minds back to the creation story and recognize that that happened 6 times, a message to man that God, this is how he develops us, from dark to light. And to, as a word of encouragement, I would love to think that we could start our life in the Lord in light and just stay there. Because what does darkness represent? It represents sin. What else? Death. Did I hear struggle? Destruction, right? Darkness, in literal senses, if I went downstairs, and I was at Dan and Beth's, and thank you for having me, and I turned all the lights in downstairs off, and I closed the door, put a towel under the door, and then I've got a problem, right? Because this is the darkness we start in. You can't see. And when you can't see, it's difficult to walk. And these are all Bible conversations, right? Because God works with us from the point in time that we can't see. We don't know where we're going. We don't know if we're going to stub our toe or if we're going to fall over. We don't know if there's going to be a step down. Have you ever hit a step when you didn't think there was one there? It's jarring. That can hurt. I found myself on the ground wondering if I was going to be able to stand up again because everything hurting from about the waist down. I've done that, right? And if you've ever been in that situation where you can't see it, it's a scary place. And God tells us that's actually where I start with you. I start with you in the scary place. And this is where Jacob is, and he is forcing himself to trust God, as we talked about in the last class, but he's trusting God. So when you have faith and confidence in God, does that mean you have no fear? No. And it's kind of like the word courage. It doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means that with or without fear, you're still going to do what needs to be done. And faith is trusting that even when everything looks like it's really, really going to be bad, that God is in control. And you do what needs to be done. And that's where Jacob is right now. He's terrified, but he knows the path that God has laid before him, and this is where he is. He's in his dark place. Now, he wrestles with a man. I don't know how many people have ever gone camping, but the times I've gone camping, there wasn't like a guy there that just started wrestling with me for fun. So this second part of it is not only is it an angel, but then he's wrestling. I mean, is that like a pastime that happens in the pastures in Israel? I don't see it. But this wrestling account, I think, is a physical event. My understanding is it's a physical event, but the physical event is an expression of a spiritual event, right? And so the expression is that he's starts off wrestling alone with a man, and if he's wrestling alone with a man, then the man he's wrestling with has got to be himself. But Hosea tells us he wrestled with man and with God. So then we see that there's a dialogue that happens later on. So this man that he's wrestling with isn't just himself as a man. It's also as an expression or an ambassador of God. And then I wonder, is there a second that's there? Or is he also an ambassador, a representative, an angel, as it were, of God? And so I don't know that I have a question. I'm perfectly happy for there actually to be a physical malach that's been given the instruction to wrestle with him, to create the message that needs to be given to us, because that's actually what is happening here. An event happens to him that helps him in a transformative way of thinking that's on record for us, right? It's kind of like the Romans 15 verse. These things were written for your instruction. This happened not just for his benefit, but for yours, for mine. So I'm happy for it to be another physical being, and I'm happy for it also to be him, but different aspects of his character as he's struggling with a concept. Can be either one, could be both. But the dialogue makes it sound like another person, and the beginning of the conversation is, let me go, for it's daybreak. Now, I don't know what's special about the daybreak that the wrestling needs to end, but that's the message of the servant. We're coming to daybreak, right? And I need you to let me go. And Jacob says, and this is really, really strange as a dialogue, but I will not let you go unless you bless me. Right? I will not let you go unless you bless me. Why did he think to ask him for a blessing? This is like Peter thinking he needs to step out on the water. What is the wrestling that translates into, I won't let go unless you bless me? And the answer to the blessing is, tell me your name. And in his language, he's saying, my name is to be the deceiver. Right? What's he struggling with? The realization that he's been taking control, that he's deceived in his family, his brother and his dad. All of these things. He's probably seeing the namesake as it what it means, what it says, and he says, my name is to be a deceiver. And so he, this angel at that point blesses him, and he says, well, I'm going to give you a different name. He didn't ask for a new name, he asked for a blessing. But at daybreak, right, as the light is revealing everything that's around him, the blessing is, I'm going to name you Ishri El. Now, there are several thoughts on what the name means, but one of the things that I found that I think is most impressive to me on the meaning of the name is that Ishri, through this weird way of SSR and all the root values, actually is one of the words that is a root word for the word prince. And we know what El is. El is the short form of Elohim. Okay? Elohim, God. So the name he's been given is Prince of God. Prince of God. Excuse me. So then I got, this thing is like, well, what is a prince? Who knows? What is a prince? What makes a person a prince? Son of a king. A prince is a son of a king. A princess is a daughter of a king. In this context, right, when he's saying the Prince of El, prince means he's royalty. It means his father is a king. And then the second name is El, God. What is it doing? It's not only telling him what his role is, and it's telling him that his father is a king, but then it names his father, God. Imagine this. A handful of verses before, he looks at this, he says, I came into Laban's household with a staff, and I come out with 2 camps. 2 camps means I've got a double portion. Double portion means I'm a firstborn, and who gave me the double portion? God did. When I didn't even think about the control, God was making me his firstborn. And then God, right, this name comes to the angel, and the name is Israel, a prince of the living God, right? And a prince is a son of the king, and God is our king. So all of these things tie together right here. All of these things tie together. Now, we're told in Hosea that we read earlier that he struggled with God and with man, right? He wrestled with an angel and he overcame. Now, I don't know what the visual you had when I asked you to think about overcome was, but here's where Jacob is. He's struggling with this guy. I'm visualizing they're on the ground, they're rolling around. This angel, powerful being, tells him, let me go. And by the definition, and what we're being told here, is that Jacob would not let go. And this is valuable for me. It doesn't say that Jacob was, had his knee on the angel's chest and was on top of him and the angel couldn't get up. What it says is Jacob had a grasp on the angel, the messenger of God. He had his hands holding on to the messenger of God, and he wouldn't let go. So when Hosea tells us that he overcame, it didn't mean he defeated. It meant he refused to let go of the messenger of God. And he held on, not just until daybreak, but until the messenger blessed him. Because if the messenger blesses, and we know that the greater blesses the lesser, right? That's a Hebrew principle that goes all the way back to early Genesis. That means the angel is greater than Jacob, right? And had the right to bless Jacob. And if that blessing came from the angel, and the angel is a messenger of God, that means the blessing had to have come from, right? You following? Who did the blessing come from? God, right? It didn't come from some arbitrary third party. The angel doesn't speak on his own behalf. He's a messenger. He speaks on the behalf of another. So holding on to the angel is like holding on to God. So, and at that point, after he received the blessing, he lets go. He stands up. He's in the light. He's in the day. Look at the metaphors of light and of the day and of understanding. And if darkness is death, light is life. Now he's standing. He has life, right? He's no longer Jacob the deceiver. He's now a prince of the mighty God, a son of God. And it's interesting that all the people of Israel, they are Israelites. They are the chosen seed. They are the sons of God. And there's a mortal conversation, and then there's a spiritual conversation there. But it all starts with this transformation that happens in Jacob. So I'm going to kind of restate this now. I'm going to go back one time, and then we're going to go to Revelation and look at a couple things briefly. So Jacob enacts what looks like baptism. Because baptism is the same kind of concept. It says, I lived for myself until I understood that there was something greater to live for. And I realized that I enact a symbol of death, of the casting off of all the cares of this life and this world to give myself to a new path. But when I come out of the waters of baptism, as I'm sure many people here have, and many people here may be thinking about, right, that I come out of the water, and what's different? What's different is that God and the people around me all see the commitment I've made, but nothing has changed except I'm a little wetter than I was a minute ago, right? There's no physiological change except wet clothes, right? And this excitement that I took into the water with me that comes back out of the water with me because I'm excited about what I see God is doing and that I get to have a place in that. And that's pretty profound. And this is where Jacob is. He does this. He's working with his terror and his fears, and he's also working with his newfound realization that God is doing something in his life that is profound, and he's stepping out in trust, not unafraid, but stepping out in trust. And one of the reasons you get the physical discussion of separation and the beginning of a wrestling, of a struggle, I don't know about you, but I find struggling with the desires of my flesh is not a light struggle. It is not for the weak of heart, right? Taking on that commitment and standing with God and seeking to become like God in the way that he's laid out before us, it is not for the weak-hearted. It's difficult. I may go for weeks and even months, and things are going great, and then one day I may, kind of show up, and it's like, oh, man, things are difficult. There are lots of different services that we're in. There are lots of different interactions we're in. We may be helping other people. We may be beyond our means in how to serve, or, there may be all sorts of different trials that we don't have the answers to, and we are constantly struggling with the challenge, the disciplining challenges God is placing before us to grow us up. And oftentimes, I find myself in the middle of a beautiful day in complete darkness, I have no idea how to take the next step, right? I'm blind to the next act. And the confidence, the thing though, that I know is that God isn't absent. He's just placed me in a circumstance that I don't know how to respond to. And the further I go, the harder I find those circumstances are. I don't know if that's everyone's experience, and your mileage may vary, but I do not find getting older makes it getting easier. I find getting older means that the challenges placed in front of us, both at a physical level and a spiritual level, are deeper. They're harder, right? And frankly, more interesting. So, you end up with trying to accomplish things, with the guidance and direction of God. And I know Chris and I were talking yesterday. I didn't ask you, but, looking at trying to set up a mission program in Haiti, you had no idea how to make that happen, right? And I know you and Steve, and I've been in the dialogue with people, and we're like, we got one step, and we did the 2 steps that we could do, and we don't know if we can even sustain this. It may be something that has to be, what do you mean there's a building available? What, there's land over there? Oh, wait a minute, maybe we can take the next step. And now we've got that in place. Oh, if we've got to provide a platform where we can send volunteers, oh, there's a house across the street that's for rent, and it's actually affordable, and it's like these things we didn't make them happen, right? We didn't make any of them happen. The sequence of things has been placed in the laps of the people taking one step, and that's what I mean more interesting. You apply yourself, you get partway down, this is what you're supposed to be doing, and then you got a dead end, and you're thinking, well, gosh, I thought this is what I was supposed to do, and then the dead end falls over, and you're like, oh, there's not a dead end, there's another step. That is the exercise of faith with God, is taking one step at a time, knowing He's the one that's drawing the path out in front of you. And sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's just, I'm having a hard time keeping, God's word in front of me, right? It could be any of these things, and it doesn't matter where you are in your path or your journey, there's a challenge coming in the next step. And that, I think, is the manifestation, you probably already picked that up, of the struggle that doesn't go until 2 a.m. It goes until daybreak. And in our story, right, here in Genesis, daybreak is the establishment of the kingdom of God. It's what's coming. It's when the new name is going to be given to the servants who have, and I like the 1984 NIV, it says, overcome. Did you know in the NIV, in the 84 NIV, all 7 of the ecclesias, it has that assertion at the end. But to those who overcome, and I think that's something that particular group of translators connected, is they recognize the Genesis overcome, they recognize the Hosea overcome, and they recognize an appropriate translation in the Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3 that all 7 of the statements are overcoming statements to the one who overcomes. And here's what we get from Jacob. Not that he won the fight, but that he didn't stop. And I think that's huge, and I think it's incredibly important that we all walk away. If we take one message away today, it's not that you have to win. Jesus won, but I didn't. I've already lost that fight multiple times, but you know what? We're not being told that we have to win the fight. We're being told that we should do what Jacob did. Refuse to let go. Refuse to let go. Refuse to let go. Doesn't matter how bad it is. Doesn't matter what you're struggling with. Do not let go of the message and the messenger of God. And that message is external, and that message is internal. Because when you have an eye to the hand of God working, you see God working in your life. You don't always have someone coming externally to you saying, here's the challenge, here's the struggle, right? Don't let go. Sometimes it's internal. Sometimes it's what you're fighting with inside that you feel like it's just winning. But what God is saying is it's not a question of who wins. It's a question of whether or not you quit, right? And that's the story we're getting with Jacob in my assessment, that he refused to let go. Now, there's a positive, and there's an interesting thing. Now, there's a comment about how it's always darkest just before the dawn, right? If you haven't heard that, let me say it again. It's always darkest just before the dawn. Now, funny enough, this is physically true. If you've ever stayed up all night and you've got the moon out and the stars and all this stuff, and it's like that 45 minutes before first light, it's like things get silent and The darkness becomes like pervasive. And the thinking I have in this space is, and it doesn't lay that out, but when does he get to the point where the messenger is saying, okay, let go of me now? It's just before the dawn, right? It's just before the dawn. And the word of encouragement I get from that is, it's sometimes you're like, I'm holding on strong. Yeah, you're saying don't let go, and I'm with you, and I'm holding on strong. But struggles come in our lives, and they get harder as we get older, more and more difficult. But here's the truth, is it's always darkest just before the dawn. When you are at that point in your life where you think, I could not hold on one more day, don't think about how long you have to hold on. You only have to hold on right now. Because if you're at that place where it's darker than it's ever been, it's always darkest just before the dawn. You only have to hold on for the next breath, right? For the next struggle. Just hold on for one. Don't think about how long you have to do it. Don't let go. Hold on. You only have to hold on right now. And what you'll find out is it is always darkest just before the dawn. The light is just around the corner. What you thought you couldn't hold on to for one more second solves itself. God intervenes. God gets in the way, right? And he carries you into the light. And I've seen that. It's not just one thing where we're starting now and just before we die it's the darkest and it's the one. I've seen that happen again and again and again. And I always reevaluate where I am right now, because I look back at times where I let go and I regret that. And then the next time it happens, I remembered that I let go the first time, and now I regret it, and my fight's a little better, it's a little stronger, and sometimes I may get all the way through, but I'm always reassessing, and I'm looking back, and I thought, I probably could have made it through that if I'd have just taken one more breath and held on just a little tighter, because it's always darkest just before the storm. When you think you just can't do it anymore, that's probably where God is about to intervene. And so this story is true for the events and the sequences in short periods, and it's true for our whole life. And the beauty of this thing is the gift, the blessing that's given to him, right? When we talk about New Testament, when it talks about the believers are all part of Israel. You're either adopted into the family line of Israel, which makes you Israel, or you're physically part of the promised seed of Abraham, which makes you literally Israel. But all those who live in faith eventually become Israel, the princes of God. And that's a conversation that's a thread throughout the scriptures and really revealed in the New Testament scriptures, where if Christ is in us and we're in him and we're in God, then we are his children. We are his sons. We are his daughters. And if God is our king and we are his children, then we are princes and princesses, right? We are Israel. So we inherit the same promise if we hold on, as Jacob did. Now there's the next conversation, and it's really, really beautiful, but it's funny how it reads. The angel wouldn't share anything with him. He wouldn't share his name. And this is kind of a common thing. It happens 2 or 3 times in scriptures where you have an angel intervention with men, and one of the questions comes up is, what is your name? One of them is like, well, it is wonderful, but actually the Hebrew is like, it's actually too wonderful. In other words, I could explain it to you, but you can't comprehend. It's beyond the glory that your mind can grasp, right? And the angel here is kind of like, why do you ask? Why do you ask? Well, why would you ask? Well, I would ask because I'd want to know. But the question is it's actually, that's not the theme of the event. It's not the storyline. The name of the angel is not the point. And that's what the angel is saying. It's actually not relevant to this conversation. It's not what we want to put on record for people to hear, right? And ultimately, it's probably the same thing. It's probably the messenger of God carries with him the glory of God. The name of the messenger is probably beyond our grasp. But what is left on record is the renaming of Jacob to Israel, because that is the glorious thing that God is leaving us with us in this message. So Jacob's response is, then I'm going to name this place Peniel, right? Peniel, because I have seen God face to face. And then it reads, yet my life was spared. But I want to propose to you that that's actually not the best interpretation, right? And I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so take this with a grain of salt, like everything you should take that I say. Jacob, when he wrestled, when he struggled, the character and glory of God was revealed to him through his struggles. He metaphorically saw God face to face, and as a result, he lived. He didn't live despite the fact that he saw an expression of God in the angel. He didn't live despite that. The message he's giving us here is because of his struggle, because of his wrestling, because of his interaction with God working in his life and refusing to give up, God revealed himself to Jacob. God transformed Jacob to Israel. Jacob sees who God is, and that made all the difference. The result of his product is that he lives in the light after the blessing. And this message was written for our edification because I want to let you know that that's what God is telling you. That's what he's telling me, is that don't let go. However difficult the struggle is that's in front of you, do not let go, because I'm going to reveal myself to you through your struggles, through that disciplining, through that encouragement of the challenge in your life, the interesting things and the very difficult things. I'm going to reveal myself to you so that you will see me, and that will make all the difference. And I will raise you up, give you a new name in the light of day, in life eternal. And I'm just going to close with a thought. I'm not going to read these, but when you get to Revelation 2 and 3, and all of the promises that come out here in Revelation 2 and 3, there are 7 times where it says, and again, this is NIV, 84 NIV, the older NIV. Every time it says, to the one who overcomes, I will give the right. To the one who overcomes, I will establish. To the one who overcomes, I will give him authority. Right? 7 times he does that. To the one who overcomes, I will give the right to sit upon my throne with me as I sat upon my Father's throne with him. 7 times. All of the 7 blessings that go to the 7 ecclesias at the beginning of Revelation are all to overcomers, not people who won the fight, because overcoming is defined as people who don't give up. Overcomers are the ones who didn't give up the fight. And brothers and sisters and all of those who are listening, all the attention, this is what I encourage you through the scriptures. Hold on with all you have, because the time is short, the kingdom is near, and God wants you to stand and will help you through your challenges and struggles in your walk in him in this life.